Life gets messy. Faith doesn't always feel steady. And sometimes the pain runs so deep, you wonder if God even sees you. If that's you, I see you. I've been there. And this show was created for people like us. We'll share the heartbreak, the flickers of hope, and the God who never walks away. This is Bare Faith, where raw faith and deep pain meet a relentless God.
We started this series with a confession. Life isn't done and our stories haven't closed. And we spent 5 weeks refusing to pretend otherwise. Welcome to Bare Faith. I'm Dr. Gladys Childs, and this is the last episode of the Learning to Live with the Unfinished series. And today's episode is Whole in the Waiting. I want to put a question on the table and leave it there for the next 20 minutes. It's the question underneath every other question we have asked in this series. Can we be whole right now? Not when the situation changes, or when our prayers get answered, or when the test results come back, or the relationship heals, or that career starts making sense. But right now, in the middle of the mess we have been sitting in together for the past 5 weeks. Psalm 30, verse 5 says, "For his anger is but for a moment, and his favor is for a lifetime. Weeping may tarry for the night, but joy comes with the morning." We like to grab the second half of that verse and just hold on to it for dear life. Joy comes in the morning. And we stitch it on pillows, we text it to friends at midnight. But the word we skip is tarry. Weeping may tarry. And in Hebrew, it means to lodge, to stay the night, to set up camp. The verse says weeping, and that covers all of it. The grief, the frustration, the exhaustion, and those seasons that will not close. And it doesn't just visit, but it moves in. And it does not check with us about the lease. Joy comes, the verse says so, but it does not say when the night ends. So the real question is not whether morning is coming. The real question is whether we can live as a whole people while it is still dark. Somebody watching this right now got dressed this morning and went to work and smiled at the right times and answered good when someone asked how they were doing. And the distance between good and what is actually happening inside them could fill a canyon. We are 6 weeks into this series, and I want to stop and say what I think a lot of us have been carrying. We're tired. We're tired of performing a version of ourselves that has it more together than we really do. That smiling at church, that we're hanging in there at the school pickup line, or the way we edit our prayer requests to make them sound manageable, because the unmanageable version would make people feel uncomfortable. And we have gotten so practiced at this performance that some of us have forgotten what our actual face looks like underneath it. Now, that performance is not always dishonest. Sometimes it's just survival. But we put on a face because we need to function. Kids need breakfast, bills need to be paid, and our jobs don't pause because our insides feel like they are just falling through the floor. So we perform. And then we get in the car at the end of the day and the quiet hits and our faces come off and we just sit there for a minute before we can walk into our own house. And the exhaustion of this just goes bones deep. We're not just tired from carrying the unfinished. We are tired from carrying it, but making it look like we're not carrying anything at all. We're running 2 lives at once. The one on the surface where everything is managed, and then the one underneath where we are drowning in questions with no good answers and an ache with no expiration date. And here is the layer underneath the exhaustion. Some of us are starting to accept something we have been fighting for months or maybe years. This might not end the way we pictured. The marriage might not become what we imagined on our wedding day. The diagnosis might be the diagnosis. Our child may not come home. The career we gave everything to might never produce what we believed it would. And that acceptance does not come like a wave. It comes like a slow leak, a little more air escaping until one week we realize that our tires are flat and we've been driving on the rim for longer than we care to admit. And no one teaches us how to grieve something that hasn't died, but is never going to be what we hoped. There's no casserole for that. We don't get cards. There's no ceremony to mark the moment we stopped expecting the ending we wanted and start trying to make peace with the one we got. So when we come back, I want to tell you about a woman named Grace who sat in a parking lot for 11 minutes because she had forgotten what it felt like to walk into a building without bracing herself. We'll be right back.
Exhausted from striving? There's a better way. My book, Chasing Emptiness, Finding Fullness, is available now.
Her name is Grace, and she sat in the parking lot of the imaging center for 11 minutes before she opened the car door. She counted them on the dashboard clock because she had been through enough appointments in the past 14 months to know the rhythm. The clipboard, the gown, the technician making small talk while positioning the machine, and the silence after. And she sat in the parking lot because she was trying to remember the last time she walked somewhere without tension just flooding her soul. 14 months earlier, her doctor had used the phrase autoimmune condition and spent 20 minutes explaining what it meant. Not just for the next few months, but what it meant for the rest of her life. And while the medication helped manage symptoms, and manage was the word they kept using, Grace understood the translation. There'd be good stretches and bad stretches, and fatigue that just cycles on its own calendar, and inflammation that just shows up without warning. She could do everything right and still wake up unable to close her hand around a coffee mug. She was only 43 years old, and she ran a small design business from the spare bedroom, the one that she and her husband had converted when she left her firm 2 years before. And she had finally gained a lot of clients and momentum, and her reputation was just starting to travel. The diagnosis did not stop any of that. It just rearranged it. Good days, she front-loaded with precision work, and bad days, she just answered emails from her couch with her laptop on a pillow because the desk made her hips ache. And she learned to plan her life in 12-hour increments because anything further out was just guesswork. But her husband was amazing, and he handled everything the way that he always did. He researched, he reorganized the kitchen so the heavy pots just sat at counter height. And he drove her to appointments without being asked. And he stopped bringing up their trip to Portugal. They'd been planning a trip for their 20th anniversary. And Grace had restaurant lists on her phone. But after the diagnosis, those lists just sat there untouched, and neither of them mentioned them. The future had become a room they both walked past without opening the door. And Grace stopped saying yes to events. She even turned down a freelance contract worth double her usual rate because it required 2 consecutive full weeks, and she could not guarantee even 2 consecutive good days. So she let the world get smaller And she told herself she was being smart about it. She was managing her expectations. She was conserving energy. And all the responsible sounding words we use when actually we're just shrinking. The turning point was on a Wednesday. She was just staring at her laptop at the kitchen table, her tea going cold beside her. And her husband walked in from the garage with a flat cardboard box, and he sat it on the counter without a word. They were colored pencils, professional grade, the kind that she had mentioned once months back, and the kind she used to sketch with before the business ate her margins and the diagnosis ate everything else. He said, "I saw them and I thought of you." And he poured himself a glass of water and walked right back out. She opened the box and she held one of the pencils, and the weight of it in her fingers just hit something she wasn't expecting. She hadn't drawn for herself in over a year. The business had been work, but this had been something else. So she pulled out a sheet of printer paper off the stack and she put a line on it, and then another. And she sat there and she drew for 40 minutes, her hand cramping twice, and she would stretch it and then she would just get back going. And when she stopped, the tea was stone cold and the light had moved. But she hadn't thought about the imaging center or the medication schedule or Portugal the entire time her hand was on the paper. She didn't call it a breakthrough. She called it Wednesday. And she drew again on Thursday and Saturday. And while nothing about her condition changed, the imaging appointments kept coming. The fatigue still cycled. But Grace stopped waiting for the condition to end before she treated her own life as something worth filling. She rebooked Portugal, a shorter trip, and she said yes to one evening event. And she started drawing on Tuesdays and Thursdays like it was on the calendar, because it was. And she decided the diagnosis could have her schedule, but it couldn't have her, the whole her, the one who makes things and who shows up to dinner and books plane tickets even when her body doesn't cooperate. She's still managing, and the pencils still sit on the counter next to the tea she keeps letting go cold. But she isn't performing anymore. She's living inside of her troubles, not on the other side of it. And Grace decided to live before the story resolved. And 3,000 years before Grace picked up that pencil, a king sat down and wrote the prayer she had been afraid to pray. Psalm 13. 6 verses. And David writes, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I take counsel in my own soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day?" 4 times in 2 verses he says, "How long?" This isn't a man searching for the right words. This is a man who has run out of every word except these. And we don't know the occasion. Scholars have connected it to his years running from Saul, to the rebellion of Absalom, to a dozen other seasons where David's life sat in pieces. And the psalm doesn't tell us which crisis produced it. It could be any of them. It could be ours. And look what David is saying. Will you forget me forever? He isn't hedging. He's not adding, I know you are good, God, but he is asking God to his face if he has walked away permanently. How long will you hide your face from me? He is telling God what it feels like when God has turned around. And then verse 2, how long must I take counsel in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? That line is the inside of every head that has spent too many nights running the same argument, the same fear, the same unanswered question on loop with no one to hand it to. And this is the man God called a man after my own heart. And this is how he prayed. Not cleaned up and not softened for public consumption. David said the ugly version, and it ended up in Scripture, which means God looked at this prayer and he said, keep that one. My people are going to need it. And then verse 3, consider and answer me, O Lord my God, light up my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. He's still asking, he's still pressing. He has not given up on God. He's just stopped pretending that the silence doesn't hurt. And then somewhere between verses 4 and 5, something happens that the psalm doesn't explain. No angel shows up. There were no army retreats or some voice coming down from heaven. From what we understand, his circumstances haven't changed, but David does. And verse 5 says, but I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. The same man, the same psalm, the same night for all we know. He moves from, will you forget me forever, to, well, I will sing to the Lord. And nothing between those lines suggests the situation changed. David didn't get an answer. He made a decision. He decided to trust before the evidence arrived. He decided to sing before the morning came. And that is what it costs to be whole while the night is still going. It's not a feeling. It's a decision made with trembling hands inside a prayer that still has "how long" written all over it. When we come back, we're going to talk about 3 ways to carry this into the week ahead. If Bare Faith is hitting home for you, subscribe so you never miss an episode. New ones drop every Wednesday. David wrote "How long" and "I will sing" in the same psalm. Grace opened a box of colored pencils and decided the diagnosis could have her schedule, but not her life. Here are 3 ways to carry this into our ordinary days. Option 1, give yourself permission. We keep telling ourselves we will start living when? When the health improves, when the marriage stabilizes, when we figure out the next step. Grace sat in the parking lot for 11 minutes because she had spent 14 months waiting for a resolution before she gave herself permission to draw a line on a piece of paper. David didn't wait for God to answer before he decided to trust. He trusted in verse 5 while the questions from verse 1 still hung in the air. And whatever we had been postponing until conditions improve, we need to ask whether the conditions are actually the problem or whether we're the ones holding ourselves back. Option 2, tell the whole truth. David didn't choose between honesty and faith. He wrote, will you forget me forever? And I will sing to the Lord, in the same 6 verses. He didn't edit out the ache to sound more spiritual, and he didn't try to bury the trust to stay credible in his pain. He said all of it. We can trust God and admit we're running on fumes. We can believe the morning is coming and confess that the night is wearing us down. We can love our lives and grieve what they have cost us. The version of faith that says we have to pick one isn't in this psalm. David destroyed it in those verses. Option 3, trust the morning. Psalm 30 verse 5 says, weeping may tarry for the night, but does not give us the length of the night. It doesn't say the night lasts a week or a year or a decade. It says joy comes with the morning and leaves the schedule with God. And this, if we're being honest is the hardest step because it means releasing our timelines. Because we want to know when. When will our health turn around? When will the relationship heal? When will the calling make any sense? And God says, joy comes. But He doesn't say when. Trusting the morning is real while the night is still going to require a kind of courage we don't always get credit for. And it might be the act of faith that finally sets us free from trying to control a clock God hasn't handed us. So we have 3 ways to live this. Option 1, give yourself permission. Option 2, tell the whole truth. Or option 3, trust the morning. Pick one to focus on this week and see where God meets you there. So we have been in this series for 6 weeks. We've named the ache and we've watched people refuse to let the unfinished stop them. And we talked about holding promise and pain in the same hands. And now we come to the one who did it first. We're in John 13, the night before the cross, and Jesus knows what is coming. And John tells us he knew that his hour had come to depart out of this world to the Father. So Jesus knows that Judas has already decided, and he knows Peter will deny him before morning, and every man in the room will run before sunrise. And Jesus gets up from the table, and he takes off his outer garment, and he picks up a towel, and he pours water into a basin, and he kneels on the floor, and he starts washing their dirty feet. And John 13:3 says, he did this knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. Full authority and full knowledge. He could have spent that night preparing them and arming them with enough theology to survive the next 72 hours. But Jesus chose a towel and a basin instead. And Peter stopped him and said, Lord, do you wash my feet? And he couldn't make any sense of it. And Jesus said, what I am doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will understand. And that sentence, it belongs to every unresolved season we have talked about in this series. What I'm doing you do not understand now, but afterward you will. Jesus was whole that night. The outcome was the cross, but Jesus was whole. Not because his circumstances were favorable, but because who he was had nothing to do with what was about to happen to him. He could kneel and wash feet and love people who are about to abandon him because his identity ran deeper than the worst night of his life. That is the Christ who meets us in the unfinished. He doesn't hand us answers. He kneels beside us with a towel. He gets low, right there, right where we are, in the season that has not resolved. And he says, I know you don't understand this yet. Just stay with me. I am here. If you'll stay with me afterwards, you will understand. Our unfinished stories are not empty spaces. It's the ground where Christ kneels. If today reached something in you, my devotional Chasing Emptiness, Finding Fullness is now available. 45 days of scripture, reflection, and journaling built for the person who is learning to sit with God right where they are instead of waiting until things get better to let Him in. It's available on Amazon, or you can scan the QR code on the screen to grab your copy today. Thank you for being here, and thank you for all 6 weeks. I know what this series has asked of you. You sat in places where the answers didn't come easy, and you didn't look away. You're not waiting to become whole. You already are, because the God who holds the unfinished story is holding you right now. So keep kneeling, keep serving, keep living, even here.